Chapter 7. Synthetic Drugs. 7.1 The Rise of Synthetic Drugs. Synthetic drugs, also known as new psychoactive substances, NPS, have become a significant part of the global drug scene in the last few decades. These substances are designed to mimic or even enhance the effects of more traditional illicit drugs such as cannabis, cocaine, and ecstasy. Unlike naturally derived drugs, synthetic drugs are created in laboratories, which allows for an ever-expanding array of compounds with differing effects. The rise of these substances can be attributed to several factors, including advancements in chemical technology, changes in drug enforcement laws, and the adaptability of drug markets to consumer demands. The evolution of synthetic drugs can be traced back to scientific curiosity and the desire to understand how drugs interact with the human body. Researchers initially synthesized compounds to study their medicinal properties. However, as regulatory frameworks tightened around well-known substances, clandestine chemists began modifying the molecular structures of illegal drugs to create new chemicals that bypassed existing drug laws. This began a cat-and-mouse game between regulators and drug manufacturers, with the latter constantly developing new substances to stay one step ahead of legal restrictions. In the 2000s, synthetic drugs gained significant popularity, notably so-called legal highs. These were often sold in head shops and online, misleadingly labeled as not for human consumption to avoid health regulations. They appealed to users because of their legality, perceived safety, and ease of purchase. Yet the side effects and health risks of these substances were poorly understood. Reports of adverse effects and deaths started to rise, leading to increased public concern and a push for stricter laws to manage the problem. One of the first classes of synthetic drugs to gain widespread attention was synthetic cannabinoids. Marketed under names like Spice and K2, these substances were sprayed onto plant material and smoked. They interact with the same brain receptors as THC, the active component of cannabis, but often with much higher potency and unpredictability. The effects can be severe and unlike natural cannabis, including instances of extreme agitation, hallucinations, and cardiovascular issues, underscoring the danger of these synthetic compounds. Another prominent group of synthetic drugs is synthetic cathinones, commonly known as bath salts. These drugs were initially presented as a legal alternative to ecstasy or cocaine. Structurally similar to the khat plant's natural cathinone, synthetic variants can have a range of stimulating effects, but can also lead to violent behavior, panic attacks, and life-threatening health problems. The synthetic cathinones highlighted the unpredictability and danger of NPS to the broader public when reports of bizarre and sometimes violent incidents began to surface in the media. The Internet has played a critical role in the rise of synthetic drugs. Online forums and dark web marketplaces facilitate both the sharing of information and the distribution of these substances. Consumers can easily access a variety of synthetic drugs, often with little understanding of their potency, composition, or the risks involved. The anonymity of these transactions presents significant challenges to law enforcement and public health authorities seeking to control and monitor drug distribution. Chemical diversity is one of the defining characteristics of synthetic drugs. New substances are continually being developed, some with novel properties that appeal to niche user groups. The rapid proliferation of these substances creates difficulties for health professionals and drug testing, as standard screens may not detect these novel compounds. In some cases, synthetic drugs have been used to avoid detection, particularly by individuals subject to regular drug testing, such as athletes or employees in certain industries. The legislative response to the rise of synthetic drugs has been complex. Many countries have resorted to analog laws, banning substances with similar structures to known illegal drugs. However, with each ban, new compounds emerge to take their place. Comprehensive legislation, such as the United States Synthetic Drug Abuse Prevention Act of 2012, has been enacted to broaden the range of compounds subject to control. But the pace of new drug creation remains a challenge, as does the enforcement against substances that are not yet illegal. Health risks associated with synthetic drugs are potentially severe and can include acute toxic effects and long-term psychological issues. Synthetic cannabinoids have been linked to rapid heart rate, vomiting, agitation, and hallucinations, while bath salts have been associated with extreme paranoia, violent behavior, and the potential for long-lasting neurological damage. These health concerns are exacerbated by the lack of reliable information on the substance's content, which can vary between batches or even within the same batch. Efforts to combat the rise of synthetic drugs have also included education and prevention. Campaigns have aimed to inform the public about the dangers of NPS and to dispel myths about their safety. This includes targeting at-risk populations, such as young adults and frequent nightclub attendees, as well as outreach to inform medical professionals about the identification and treatment of synthetic drug intoxication. Collaboration at an international level has also heightened, as synthetic drugs do not adhere to national boundaries and require a coordinated global response. Chapter 7 provides an in-depth look at synthetic drugs, exploring their history, chemical diversity, and the global challenge they present. It delves into the efforts to monitor, regulate, and ultimately mitigate the harms caused by these substances, highlighting the ongoing battle between innovation in substance creation and attempts to protect public health. As the chapter progresses, we will explore specific synthetic drugs in detail, discuss their impact on society, and examine international case studies that illustrate the complexity of this modern drug problem. 7.2 The Societal Impact of Synthetics. Synthetic drugs are a broad category of substances designed to mimic or produce similar effects to illegal drugs such as cannabis, cocaine, MDMA, and LSD. Unlike traditional drugs, these are often manufactured by altering the chemical structure of existing drugs to create new compounds. The societal impact of synthetic drugs is significant and multifaceted, affecting public health, legal systems, economies, and communities. One of the primary societal impacts of synthetic drugs is on public health. Emergency rooms across the globe have reported spikes in admissions due to the use of synthetic drugs. These substances often have unpredictable effects, including severe agitation, hallucinations, and life-threatening health issues, such as heart attacks and kidney failure. The lack of research and understanding of these substances makes it difficult for medical professionals to effectively treat such cases. Consequently, the rise in synthetic drug use can place a significant strain on healthcare systems, which must allocate resources to deal with this new and unpredictable challenge. The legal system also grapples with the rapid proliferation of synthetic drugs. Lawmakers struggle to keep up with the pace at which new synthetic drugs enter the market. When a synthetic drug is outlawed, chemists can modify the molecular structure slightly to create a new substance that is not yet illegal. This cat-and-mouse game complicates law enforcement efforts and creates a continuously evolving legal landscape. Efforts to legislate these substances are often delayed, allowing time for their distribution and use to become more widespread. Synthetic drugs pose unique challenges to drug education and prevention efforts. Traditional drug education programs are based on knowledge of well-known substances, but the diversity and novelty of synthetic drugs mean that potential users may lack awareness of their risks. Educators and prevention specialists must constantly adapt their strategies to include information on these emerging threats. However, the rapidly changing nature of these drugs makes it difficult to provide current and relevant information to the public. The widespread availability of synthetic drugs through online marketplaces and the dark web has made them accessible to a global audience. This accessibility has both demand and supply side effects. On the demand side, users can easily obtain these substances without traditional drug trafficking networks. On the supply side, manufacturers and dealers exploit this anonymity to distribute their products, often targeting young and inexperienced users. The digital footprint of synthetic drug transactions complicates tracking and enforcement by authorities and increases potential markets for producers. Economically, the production and sale of synthetic drugs can be highly lucrative. The low cost of production, high demand, and ability to evade legal restrictions make synthetic drugs appealing to manufacturers and dealers. However, this economic activity is often unregulated and can fund criminal enterprises. The illegal nature of the trade means that it does not contribute to tax revenues and can undermine legitimate economic activity. Furthermore, it can attract additional criminal behavior and violence to communities. The social impact of synthetic drugs must be addressed, particularly their effect on youth culture. Adolescents and young adults are often drawn to these substances due to their novelty and perceived safety compared to traditional drugs. The misconception that legal or semi-legal status equates to safety can contribute to their willingness to experiment with these substances. Such experimentation can lead to addiction, adverse health effects, and a potential gateway to other drug use. Engaging with youth to provide accurate information and supportive resources is crucial in mitigating the harmful effects that synthetic drugs can have on this demographic. Communities are affected by the use of synthetic drugs in several ways. These substances can increase crime rates, with activities ranging from petty theft to support a drug habit to more serious drug-related violence. The presence of synthetic drugs can also lead to a general decline in community cohesion and safety, as public spaces may be perceived as less safe due to the presence of intoxicated individuals. Community resources may be channeled into law enforcement and healthcare costs associated with synthetic drug use, diverting them from other community projects and services. Environmental impact is an often overlooked aspect of the synthetic drug phenomenon. The clandestine laboratories that produce synthetic drugs can have damaging effects on the environment. The disposal of chemical byproducts from the production process can lead to pollution of water sources, soil contamination, and other forms of environmental degradation. Additionally, as many of these labs are illegal and unregulated, there are no controls in place to mitigate these harms. The environmental toll can have long-term consequences for ecosystems and human health. Efforts to combat the societal impact of synthetic drugs include international cooperation and policy development. Organizations such as the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, work to monitor trends in synthetic drug production and trafficking to inform member states and assist in creating regulatory frameworks. These efforts are critical in establishing a global response to a problem that knows no borders. International policy strategies must be adaptive and evidence-based, considering the complex nature of synthetic drug production and distribution. Synthetic drugs have a profound impact on society. From public health crises and legal challenges to economic consequences and community disruption, the effects of these substances are widespread and deeply concerning. Comprehensive and collaborative approaches are needed to address the societal impact of synthetic drugs. This includes ongoing public education, rigorous law enforcement strategies, environmental protections, and international policy initiatives. It is essential for society to remain vigilant and proactive in dealing with the evolving challenges posed by synthetic drugs. 7.3 Psychological Dynamics of Synthetic Drug Use. Synthetic drugs are created through chemical synthesis to mimic the effect of naturally occurring drugs. They are often illegally altered to evade drug laws, leading to a plethora of substances that can have unpredictable and severe health effects. The psychological dynamics of synthetic drug use are complex and can vary from individual to individual. Understanding these dynamics is critical to grasping why synthetic drugs are appealing to some individuals and how use can develop into abuse or dependence. One principal psychological factor in the appeal of synthetic drugs is the search for novel experiences. Users often seek new sensations or states of consciousness that differ from what they encounter in everyday life. Synthetic drugs can provide varied and potent experiences that are often described as intense or euphoric. This quest for novelty can be driven by a desire for exploration or escapism, where the individual wishes to escape the mundane or challenging aspects of their lives. It may also be fueled by peer influences or a culture that glamorizes drug use and experimentation. The development of psychological dependence on synthetic drugs is another significant aspect to consider. Dependence is characterized by the irresistible urge to use the drug despite negative consequences. Synthetic drug use can lead to changes in brain chemistry that reinforce drug-taking behavior, making it more difficult to stop using the drug. This transformation can result in altered priorities, where obtaining and using the drug becomes more important than other interests, activities, or responsibilities. Synthetic drug use is often associated with risk-taking behavior. The unknown nature of these substances, including what they are made of and how they might affect the user, adds an element of risk. Some users are drawn to this risk due to a desire for thrill or a sense of invincibility. This thrill-seeking behavior is often seen in youth or in environments that encourage living on the edge. The risks taken with synthetic drugs may be underestimated due to a lack of knowledge or disregard for the potential harm. The influence of social dynamics plays a crucial role in the use of synthetic drugs. Social groups and networks can both promote and provide access to these substances. The desire to fit in or be accepted within a social circle can drive individuals to participate in drug use. This social component is significant because it can both initiate drug use and contribute to its continuation, as continued use can be influenced by the fear of social exclusion or the desire to maintain social bonds. A person's mental health status can also influence synthetic drug use. Individuals suffering from mental health conditions, such as depression or anxiety, may use synthetic drugs as a form of self-medication. These substances can temporarily alleviate symptoms, but this relief is often short-lived and can lead to a deteriorating mental health situation in the long term. The use of synthetic drugs becomes a coping mechanism, albeit ineffective and potentially harmful, for managing emotional or psychological distress. Another critical psychological dynamic is the development of tolerance and the resulting escalation of use. As users take synthetic drugs over time, their bodies can develop tolerance, meaning that larger doses or more frequent use is needed to achieve the same effects. This escalation can lead to increased physical and psychological harm. It can also make quitting more challenging, as withdrawal symptoms might become more pronounced. The role of cognitive rationalization and justification is noteworthy in synthetic drug use. Users might rationalize their drug use by downplaying the risks or viewing their drug use as a means of enhancing creativity, productivity, or social interaction. These cognitive distortions can lead to continued use and prevent users from recognizing the extent of their problem and the need for help. The impact of media and online presence on the perception of synthetic drugs cannot be ignored. The internet can serve as a source of information and a marketplace for these substances. Online forums and social networks may spread misinformation about the safety or benefits of synthetic drugs, influencing attitudes and potentially encouraging experimentation. Moreover, the anonymity provided by the internet can facilitate the dissemination and acquisition of these drugs while minimizing perceived risks. Stress and environmental factors are also central to the psychological dynamics of synthetic drug use. High levels of stress, whether from work, school, or personal relationships, can increase the likelihood of drug use as a means of coping. Additionally, living in an environment where drug use is prevalent or where there are few alternatives for relaxation or socialization can lead to increased drug use. These environmental stressors can make drugs more appealing as a quick solution for relief or enjoyment. Lastly, it's essential to address the cycle of reinforcement in synthetic drug use. Positive reinforcement occurs when the effects of the drug are pleasurable, leading to repeated use. Negative reinforcement can also play a role, where the use of the drug alleviates negative feelings or withdrawal symptoms, further encouraging use. This cycle can become self-perpetuating, and breaking free from it often requires assistance from medical professionals or support networks. The psychological dynamics of synthetic drug use are multifaceted and influenced by a variety of individual, social, and environmental factors. Understanding these dynamics is crucial for developing effective preventive measures and treatment interventions for individuals who use synthetic drugs. A comprehensive approach that addresses both the psychological and physical aspects of synthetic drug use is required to mitigate the risks and help those affected by their use. 7.4 Synthetic drugs across cultures. The discourse surrounding synthetic drugs often leads to conversations not just about their chemical composition or physiological impacts, but also about the cultural contexts in which they are used and perceived. Synthetic drugs, developed through the synthesis of chemical compounds that are not found in nature, have a unique place in the cultural fabric of societies around the globe. Unlike traditional substances that often come with a long history of cultural integration and use, synthetic drugs frequently emerge rapidly, gaining swift popularity and stirring public health, legal, and cultural debates. In Western cultures, particularly in the United States and parts of Europe, synthetic drugs have often been associated with rave and club cultures. These environments, which emphasize sensory stimulation and prolonged activity, have been a breeding ground for the use of synthetic stimulants, such as methylphenidioxymethamphetamine (MDMA), commonly known as ecstasy. The prevalence of these substances within such settings is influenced by the drug's abilities to enhance sociability, decrease inhibitions, and increase energy levels. These effects align with the values of cohesion, collective experience, and endurance often celebrated in these subcultures. The legal ramifications of synthetic drug use vary dramatically across different cultures. In many Western societies, the rapid appearance of new synthetic drugs has outpaced legislation, leading to a period where legal highs can be obtained. This has raised significant challenges for lawmakers and health professionals who struggle to keep abreast of the ever-evolving drug landscape. In response, certain countries have opted to ban synthetic drugs categorically, without waiting for individual substances to be identified. This approach reflects a cultural predisposition towards precautionary measures in public health policy. In contrast, some Asian cultures have a distinctly different approach to addressing the issue of synthetic drugs. Countries like Japan and Singapore have very strict drug laws, with severe penalties that are reflective of a broader cultural emphasis on social order and conformity. In these societies, the collective well-being and the preservation of social harmony are highly valued, and as such, the use of drugs, including synthetic substances, is met with significant stigma and punitive legal consequences. This contrasts with the harm reduction strategies employed in parts of Europe that aim to reduce the negative consequences of drug use without necessarily condemning the behavior outright. The Middle East presents yet another divergent cultural perspective on synthetic drugs. Countries in this region often have cultural and legal proscriptions against intoxicants based on religious principles. However, there has been a growing concern about the use of synthetic cannabinoid products, sometimes referred to as spice, among young people in these cultures. This emerging trend is forcing a re-evaluation of traditional views and methods of drug control, highlighting tensions between contemporary synthetic drug use and long-standing cultural and religious norms. African cultures have diverse and complex relationships with drugs, including synthetics. These relationships are influenced by a combination of indigenous traditions, the legacy of colonial drug policies, and current socioeconomic conditions. Synthetic drug use has been reported in several African countries, and it is often situated within a broader context of unemployment, urbanization, and social change, highlighting how economic and cultural dynamics play a key role in the prevalence and patterns of drug consumption. Latin American societies have been more commonly associated with the production and trafficking of natural drugs, such as cocaine and cannabis. However, synthetic drugs have also been penetrating these markets and are increasingly affecting youth culture in urban areas. The emergence of synthetic drugs has been met with varied responses, from aggressive anti-narcotics campaigns to calls for legislative reform for drug use. These responses reflect varying degrees of influence from Western drug policies, local traditions, and the unique socio-political landscapes of Latin American countries. Across cultures, the Internet has played a pivotal role in the spread of synthetic drug culture by facilitating knowledge exchange and the global distribution of these substances. Online forums and dark web marketplaces have made it possible for individuals from vastly different cultural backgrounds to access a wide array of synthetic drugs, reducing the significance of geographical and cultural barriers. This has created a unified, albeit complex, global challenge for drug enforcement and drug education initiatives. The intersection of synthetic drugs and indigenous cultures is another area worth noting. While many indigenous cultures have a long history of utilizing natural psychedelics and plant-based substances for spiritual or medicinal purposes, the introduction of synthetic drugs has sometimes led to adverse outcomes. Negative impacts on health, social structures, and traditional practices have been documented, which is often compounded by a lack of culturally sensitive health services and support structures for these communities. The cultural dimensions of synthetic drug use also extend to the narratives and representations portrayed in media and popular culture. Films, music, and literature sometimes glamorize or demonize synthetic drugs, impacting public perception and influencing policymaking. These portrayals can promote stereotypes and misunderstandings about drug users, misrepresent the risks associated with drug use, and contribute to the stigma that users may experience. This, in turn, influences the broader cultural dialogue around synthetic drugs and shapes societal attitudes toward drug use and drug users. Synthetic drugs span a broad spectrum of experiences and perceptions across cultures. These substances are embedded within complex socio-cultural, economic, and political landscapes that influence patterns of use, public health responses, legal frameworks, and cultural representations. Understanding these varied contexts is critical in developing informed and effective approaches to addressing the challenges that synthetic drugs pose. As synthetic substances continue to evolve and spread, cross-cultural collaboration and dialogue will be essential for managing the global impact of these drugs. 7.5 The ethical dilemma of synthetic drug creation. Synthetic drugs are chemically manufactured substances created to mimic the effects of naturally occurring drugs. Their production involves altering the molecular structures of existing drugs to create new substances that can elude legal restrictions and detection methods. This is a process that takes place in laboratories across the globe. The creation of these synthetic drugs introduces a significant ethical dilemma that intersects with areas of public health, law enforcement, and scientific research. This chapter will explore the various facets of this dilemma, weighing their implications on society and individuals' well-being. One of the primary ethical concerns with the creation of synthetic drugs is the impact on public health. Synthetic drugs may evade legal restrictions and consequently regulatory oversight, often resulting in untested and potentially dangerous substances entering the market. Without appropriate clinical trials, the effects of these drugs on users are uncertain, posing risks of serious adverse reactions, addiction, and even fatalities. The lack of regulation means users are often unaware of the composition and potency of the drugs they are consuming, making informed decisions about drug use nearly impossible. Furthermore, producers of synthetic drugs may target vulnerable populations, such as youths, through deceptive marketing strategies, including the sale of these substances in colorful packages with appealing names. This raises an ethical issue, as it increases the accessibility and appeal of these drugs to individuals who may be less able to understand the risks involved. The potential exploitation of vulnerable users prompts questions about the responsibility of the creators and distributors to safeguard the welfare of these populations. The ethical dilemma also extends to law enforcement and the legal system. As creators of synthetic drugs continually modify chemical structures to circumvent legal restrictions, law enforcement agencies struggle to keep up with the rapid proliferation of these substances. This creates a cycle where legal measures are always a step behind, resulting in a lack of effective deterrence and challenges in prosecuting individuals involved in the synthetic drug trade. Moreover, the rapid turnover of synthetic drug variants complicates the task of accurately scheduling substances and prosecuting their unauthorized production and distribution. On the other hand, synthetic drug creation is not solely dedicated to the development of recreational drugs. The same processes are used within pharmaceutical research to develop new medications that can save lives and alleviate suffering. Synthetic chemistry has led to breakthroughs in treatments for various illnesses, including cancer, HIV/AIDS, and chronic pain conditions. In this context, ethical considerations involve ensuring that the pursuit of medical advancement does not inadvertently contribute to the proliferation of recreational synthetic drugs. The environmental impact of synthetic drug production is another ethical component requiring consideration. The clandestine manufacture of synthetic drugs often disregards environmental regulations, leading to the release of toxic chemicals into the environment. The improper disposal of chemical byproducts can contaminate soil, water sources, and air, with far-reaching effects on ecosystems and human health. The environmental degradation associated with synthetic drug production poses ethical questions about the responsibility of creators to minimize harm to the planet. Additionally, there is an ethical concern with respect to the societal impact of synthetic drugs. The rise in popularity of these substances can contribute to broader social issues, such as increased crime rates and reduced workplace productivity. Communities may see a rise in drug-related violence and property crimes, as well as strained healthcare resources due to emergency visits and treatments related to synthetic drug use. This places a burden on society and prompts scrutiny of the role of synthetic drug creators in contributing to these broader social challenges. The intellectual property rights associated with the creation of synthetic drugs also raise ethical questions. Some may argue that banning the creation of certain substances infringes on the intellectual rights of scientists and researchers. However, this argument must be balanced against the potential for harm that these substances pose. The legal and ethical frameworks for assessing intellectual property rights in this context must account for the potential negative consequences of allowing unfettered creation and ownership of synthetic compounds. Ethics in research is another pivotal point to consider within the dilemma of synthetic drug creation. Scientific research often operates under strict ethical guidelines to ensure that experimentation does not cause undue harm. However, when it comes to synthetic drugs, research on human subjects is typically not feasible due to the substance's legality and risks. This leads to experimentation in non-traditional and potentially ethically dubious contexts. The question remains, can ethical standards be maintained in a field so intricately linked with illegality and potential harm? 7.6 Chemistry of synthetic drugs. Unlike drugs derived directly from plants or animals, synthetic drugs are designed and manufactured within laboratories. The chemistry of these substances is complex, and the processes involved in their creation are rooted in organic chemistry, the study of carbon-containing compounds. A critical distinction in the chemistry of synthetic drugs is between small molecule drugs and biologics. Small molecule drugs are typically derived from chemical compounds that can easily enter cells due to their low molecular weight. These drugs are manufactured through chemical reactions between substances of defined chemical structures. Biologics, on the other hand, are much larger and often consist of proteins or nucleic acids. Their complexity requires them to be derived from living organisms, and therefore they are not considered purely synthetic, despite extensive laboratory manipulation. The synthesis of small molecule drugs universally involves the formation of covalent bonds between atoms. Key reactions in organic synthesis include additions, substitutions, eliminations, and rearrangements. All of these reactions involve the making and breaking of bonds to transform simple precursor molecules into more complex structures. Catalysts are frequently used to increase the reaction rate and improve yield without becoming consumed in the process. One category of synthetic drugs is designer drugs, which are structurally similar to known drugs of abuse but altered to avoid classification as illegal substances. The replication of these drugs often requires a deep understanding of the target molecule's pharmacophore, which is the part of the molecule responsible for its biological effects. Molecular tweaks, such as changes in functional groups or the addition of substituents, require precise control to accomplish the desired modification while maintaining or enhancing biological activity. The synthetic pathways employed to create drugs can involve multiple steps, with each step needing careful control of variables such as temperature, pressure, solvent, concentration, and pH to direct the reaction toward the desired product and reduce byproducts. Protecting groups may be used to block reactive sites on a molecule, while a specific reaction is performed at a different site. After the desired reaction is complete, these protecting groups are removed under conditions that do not affect the rest of the molecule. Purification is an essential step in the synthesis of drugs, as impurities can alter the efficacy or safety of the final product. Techniques such as crystallization, distillation, chromatography, and extraction are crucial to isolate the pure drug from reaction side products. Analytical methods like mass spectrometry and nuclear magnetic resonance (NMR) spectroscopy are then used to confirm the purity and structure of the synthesized compound. Scale-up of the drug synthesis from laboratory bench to industrial production poses additional challenges. Reactions that work efficiently on a small scale may not proceed as well, or may produce greater quantities of side products when conducted on a larger scale. Researchers must optimize conditions and sometimes develop entirely new processes for large-scale manufacturing. This transition is critical to produce a drug at a quantity and cost viable for market. The enhancement of drug properties through chemical modifications is a continuous process. For instance, the goal might be to increase the bioavailability of a drug, meaning the proportion that enters circulation and can have an active effect. Modifications might improve a drug's resistance to metabolic breakdown, increase solubility, or target it more effectively to specific tissues or cells. Pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics are two other essential areas intertwined with the chemistry of synthetic drugs. Pharmacokinetics involves how the drug is absorbed, distributed, metabolized, and excreted by the body, while pharmacodynamics pertains to the drug's biological and physiological effects. The chemical structure of a drug profoundly affects these characteristics, and small modifications can have significant impacts on efficacy and safety. Lastly, legal and ethical considerations are also a fundamental part of the synthetic drug development process. Regulatory bodies like the U.S. Food and Drug Administration (FDA) and the European Medicines Agency (EMA) set strict guidelines for the testing and approval of new drugs. Synthetic drugs, due to their potential for abuse and the rapid pace at which they can be created and altered, often pose unique challenges to these regulatory frameworks. Scientists and policymakers must work in concert to ensure these powerful tools are used responsibly and for the betterment of public health. The chemistry of synthetic drugs is a field defined by precision, control, and extensive understanding of organic reactions and principles. The pursuit of advancing medicine through synthetic drugs demands an interdisciplinary approach that marries the depth of chemical knowledge with biological relevance, safety considerations, and regulatory compliance. As the scientific community better understands diseases at the molecular level, the role of synthetic drug chemistry continues to expand, offering hope for new and improved therapeutic agents. 7.7 Biological responses to synthetic substances. Synthetic drugs, also known as designer drugs or novel psychoactive substances, NPS, are chemically manufactured substances that mimic the pharmacological effects of traditional illicit drugs such as cocaine, cannabis, and opiate derivatives. Their emergence has posed significant challenges for healthcare professionals and law enforcement due to the rapid and continuous evolution of these compounds. The biological responses to synthetic substances vary widely depending on the specific chemical structure of the drug, the dosage taken, the method of administration, and the individual's physiology and genetics. The rapid onset of action is a common characteristic among many synthetic substances. For instance, synthetic cannabinoids, which are designed to activate the same brain receptors as THC, the active compound in cannabis, can lead to effects within minutes when smoked. These effects can be unpredictable and potentially more intense than natural cannabis. Similarly, synthetic stimulants like bath salts, which share similarities with amphetamine and cocaine, quickly enter the bloodstream and can induce immediate and potent stimulant effects leading to increased heart rate and elevated blood pressure. The biological response to synthetic stimulants can be particularly harmful due to their potency and the inability of users to accurately dose. Complications such as hyperthermia, acute cardiovascular events, and neurotoxicity have been reported in users of synthetic cathinones and phenethylamines. Emergency department visits frequently involve these complications, highlighting the health risks associated with these substances. Synthetic opiates, like fentanyl and its analogs, present unique challenges due to their high potency. These substances interact with the body's opioid receptors, leading to the suppression of respiratory function at minuscule doses. Fentanyl, for instance, is estimated to be 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine, and has become a significant contributor to overdose deaths worldwide. The margin for error is extremely narrow, and even small dosage deviations can lead to life-threatening respiratory depression. Long-term biological responses to synthetic drugs can include tolerance, dependence, and addiction. As with traditional substances of abuse, repeated use of synthetic drugs can lead to a diminished response, prompting users to increase dosages to achieve the desired effects, which in turn increases the risk of overdose. Psychological dependence may follow, characterized by intense cravings and compulsive drug-seeking behavior, despite knowledge of the negative consequences. The unpredictability of synthetic substance composition leads to a varied immune response. The immune system can be modulated or suppressed by the intake of these substances, potentially increasing susceptibility to infections and illnesses. Research also suggests that certain synthetic cannabinoids can lead to a more pronounced immune response, leading to inflammation that may result in organ damage. Neurological responses to synthetic substances are equally complex and potentially severe. Synthetic substances have been linked to various neuropsychiatric outcomes, including anxiety, agitation, psychosis, and cognitive deficits. The potential for these drugs to induce neuroplastic changes in the brain with long-term use is an area of ongoing research, which remains a concern due to the possible irreversible effects on mental health and cognitive functioning. Interactions between synthetic drugs and prescribed medications are another key area of concern. Due to the lack of research on new synthetic substances, it is difficult to predict how they may interact with other drugs. Users of synthetic drugs who are on prescribed medication may therefore be at risk for unexpected and dangerous side effects. Furthermore, synthetic drugs can affect the metabolism of other drugs, leading to reduced efficacy of medications or toxically high levels in the blood. Renal and hepatic responses are critical in the metabolism and excretion of synthetic drugs, and these organs are at risk of damage through prolonged use. Some synthetic substances are metabolized into toxic metabolites that can cause direct harm to the liver and kidneys. Cases of acute kidney injury and acute liver failure linked to synthetic drug use have been reported, although more research is needed to fully understand these risks. Lastly, reproductive health can also be affected by synthetic drugs. As these substances can cross the placental barrier, they may lead to adverse developmental and reproductive outcomes. Expectant mothers who use synthetic drugs may put their unborn child at risk for congenital anomalies, developmental delays, and a host of other long-term health issues. The effects on fertility, pregnancy outcomes, and neonatal health are critical considerations for health professionals when treating individuals who use synthetic drugs. In conclusion, the biological responses to synthetic substances are diverse and complex. These responses hinge on a variety of factors including the drug's pharmacological profile, the user's biological makeup, and the context in which the drugs are used. Healthcare providers must remain informed about the evolving nature of synthetic drugs to effectively manage and treat individuals experiencing adverse reactions. It is also essential to consider the broader public health implications, as the widespread use of synthetic drugs continues to pose challenges for communities and healthcare systems around the world. 7.8 Personal accounts of synthetic drug use. The rise of synthetic drugs has become a significant public health concern over the past few decades. These drugs, often referred to as designer drugs, are created to mimic the effects of naturally occurring psychoactive substances, but often vary in potency and are associated with unpredictable health risks. In this section, we explore personal accounts of synthetic drug use, providing insight into the user experience, the motivations behind turning to these substances, and the consequences they can entail. One user, whom we will refer to as Alex, recounts their encounter with synthetic cannabinoids, often known as spice or K2. Alex began experimenting with synthetic cannabinoids as a legal alternative to marijuana, mistakenly believing they were a safe and undetectable way to experience a cannabis-like high. After multiple uses, Alex found themselves at the mercy of severe side effects, including intense paranoia, anxiety, and hallucinations. Contending with an accelerated heart rate and panic, Alex was hospitalized, an outcome far from the recreational experience they had anticipated. This harrowing episode led to a reassessment of their drug use and underlined the unpredictable nature of synthetic substances. Another account involves synthetic stimulants, frequently labeled as bath salts. Sarah, an individual initially drawn to these substances due to their ease of access and legal status, quickly learned of their potent side effects. The stimulant properties of bath salts prompted hours of heightened energy and euphoria. However, the aftermath was crippling. Sarah experienced a crash that led to overwhelming depression and fatigue. She also struggled with intense cravings for the drug, highlighting the potential for dependency. Sarah's narrative emphasizes the dangerous cycle of highs and lows associated with synthetic stimulant use, and the difficulty in breaking free from their grip. Further exploration into the experiences of synthetic drug users leads us to Molly, a college student who turned to synthetic hallucinogens out of curiosity. She experienced profound visual and sensory alterations which, while initially intriguing, quickly became distressing. The intensity of the hallucinations, coupled with an inability to discern reality, placed Molly in precarious situations, risking her safety. Following this encounter, Molly chose to abstain from further use and now cautions others about the unforeseen perils of synthetic drugs, particularly when it comes to hallucinogens. In another personal narrative, Jack shares his experience with research chemicals, a broad category of synthetic drugs designed to skirt drug laws by slightly altering the chemical structure of existing illegal substances. Seeking a novel psychedelic experience, Jack obtained a substance touted as being similar to MDMA. However, the effects were far more severe and long-lasting than anticipated. The experience led to a protracted period of confusion, disorientation, and an inability to function normally in day-to-day life. This experience served as a stark reminder of the risks associated with untested and unregulated drugs, and led to Jack advocating for caution and diligence when encountering unfamiliar substances. Personal accounts such as these offer valuable insights into the myriad effects of synthetic drugs on the user. These narratives also highlight a common theme of underestimating the drug's potency and the potential for negative, sometimes dangerous health outcomes. While each story is unique, many involve a lack of information about the risks associated with these substances and a belief that their legal status equates to safety. This misconception has been repeatedly disproven through both clinical research and anecdotal reports, emphasizing the need for comprehensive education and harm reduction strategies. The allure of synthetic drugs often stems from their portrayal as a legal and readily available alternative to illicit drugs, which attracts individuals who may be seeking novel experiences or who wish to avoid legal repercussions. However, as depicted in these personal accounts, the adverse health outcomes associated with synthetic drugs can extend far beyond those of their natural counterparts. With an ever-expanding array of synthetic drugs, it becomes increasingly challenging to disseminate timely information to potential users regarding their risks. The testimonies from synthetic drug users consistently portray a disconnect between the expected and actual effects of these substances. This disconnect arises from variations in individual chemistry, the unknown concentration of active ingredients, and the absence of quality control in the production process. Unlike regulated pharmaceuticals or natural substances with historical use data, synthetic drugs can exhibit a steep learning curve, often with dire consequences for the user. Another critical aspect of synthetic drug use is the potential for addiction, as evidenced by some personal accounts. Many synthetic drugs have a high potential for abuse, with users quickly developing tolerance, experiencing intense cravings, and suffering through challenging withdrawals. The personal struggles recounted by users in attempting to cease synthetic drug use reflect the broader issues of substance dependence and the necessity for effective support and treatment services. The personal accounts also touch upon the social and legal ramifications of synthetic drug use. Some users have faced stigmatization and isolation from peers and family members. Others have found themselves embroiled in legal issues, despite initially choosing synthetic drugs to avoid such troubles. These stories underscore the complex interplay between drug policy, societal perceptions, and the individual choices that lead to synthetic drug use. The real-life experiences of those who have used synthetic drugs shed light on the intricate and often hazardous world of synthetic psychoactive substances. Their testimonies serve as cautionary tales, advocating for a more informed public and more comprehensive approaches to drug education and policy. Through their stories, it becomes evident that the risks associated with synthetic drug use are not merely health-related, but also extend to users' social, legal, and psychological well-being. As the market for these drugs continues to evolve, it is imperative that users, healthcare providers, and policymakers collaborate to counter the dangerous allure of synthetic drugs with facts, support, and sound decision-making. 7.9 Synthetic drugs, health risks and safety. Synthetic drugs encompass a broad range of substances designed to mimic the effects of naturally occurring drugs such as marijuana, cocaine, and hallucinogens. These substances, also known as designer drugs, are often created by modifying the chemical structure of existing drugs to evade legal restrictions. Examples of synthetic drugs include synthetic cannabinoids like spice or K2, synthetic stimulants such as bath salts, and novel psychoactive substances, NPS, which can lead to unpredictable and sometimes severe health effects. The diversity and variability of synthetic drugs present unique challenges for public health, making the accurate identification and determination of their safety profile difficult. The health risks associated with synthetic drugs vary widely, depending on the specific compound and the individual's biology. Synthetic cannabinoids, for example, bind to the same brain receptors as THC, the active ingredient in marijuana, but they can do so more strongly, leading to more intense and sometimes harmful effects. Reported health problems due to synthetic cannabinoids include rapid heart rate, vomiting, agitation, confusion, and hallucinations. In more severe cases, they can lead to acute kidney injury, heart attack, and seizures. Synthetic cannabinoids have also been involved in numerous cases of overdose deaths, and their potency can vary greatly from one batch to another, increasing the risk of unpredictable reactions. Synthetic stimulants, commonly referred to as bath salts, are another group of drugs with significant health risks. These substances can cause a host of severe neurological and cardiovascular symptoms, including extreme agitation, paranoia, hallucinations, increased heart rate and blood pressure, and potential for heart attack and stroke. Users of bath salts often experience a compulsion to redose, which can quickly lead to addiction and increases the risk of overdose. Moreover, the chemical composition of these drugs can change as manufacturers alter the formula to avoid legal restrictions, which means users may not be aware of what they are taking, further escalating health dangers. Novel psychoactive substances, NPS, include a range of drugs that are synthesized to mimic the effects of established psychoactive drugs. These can be particularly risky to users because they are often sold as something else, leading individuals to consume them without knowing their true nature or potential effects. The health risks linked to NPS can include severe intoxication, psychotic episodes, and long-term psychological effects. There is also a risk of unpredictable interactions with other substances, including prescription medications, which can exacerbate adverse effects or even lead to life-threatening situations. One of the key safety issues with synthetic drugs is the lack of quality control and regulation in their production. They are often manufactured clandestinely, without adherence to any standards of safety or purity. This can result in contaminants or highly variable concentrations of the active compound, both of which pose significant health risks. Contaminants can cause unintended reactions, while variations in concentration make it nearly impossible for users to gauge dosage accurately, which is critical in avoiding overdose. The lack of data on the long-term health effects of synthetic drugs is another major concern. Because these substances are relatively new and constantly evolving, there are limited scientific studies on their long-term impact on health. However, there is evidence to suggest that prolonged use of these chemicals can lead to lasting neurological changes and may contribute to mental health disorders such as anxiety, depression, and psychosis. Moreover, withdrawal from synthetic drugs can be particularly difficult, with users reporting severe physical and psychological symptoms. Medical intervention for complications arising from synthetic drug use often requires a multifaceted approach. Emergency treatment for acute intoxication may involve managing seizures, psychosis, or life-threatening cardiovascular symptoms. Due to the diverse range of substances and their variable effects, healthcare providers may find it challenging to identify appropriate treatment protocols. As such, the potential for mismanagement of symptoms exists, making emergency responses to synthetic drug intoxication a complex process. The use of these synthetic substances poses not only direct health risks but also broader societal concerns. Driving under the influence of synthetic drugs is as dangerous as driving while impaired by traditional illicit drugs or alcohol, and can lead to accidents and fatalities. Moreover, the unpredictable behavioral changes associated with synthetic drug use, such as increased impulsivity or aggression, can have serious implications for public safety. These behavioral issues can strain relationships, lead to poor decision-making, and have legal repercussions for users. Educational efforts and prevention strategies are critical in mitigating the health risks associated with synthetic drugs. Public health campaigns that raise awareness about the dangers of these substances can help to reduce their use. Outreach programs targeting vulnerable populations such as young adults or frequent clubgoers who may be more likely to encounter synthetic drugs are particularly important. Additionally, providing support services for users, including counseling and treatment facilities, can assist in managing addiction and reducing the long-term health impacts of these drugs. Regulatory measures are also vital in managing the risks of synthetic drugs. Banning specific compounds has been a common approach. However, manufacturers often sidestep regulations by creating new derivatives that are not yet illegal. This has led to a cycle of substance emergence and prohibition that is difficult to keep pace with. Better international cooperation and information sharing among regulatory agencies, health professionals, and law enforcement can help in quickly identifying and controlling new synthetic substances. Strategies that focus on the underlying chemical structures of these drugs rather than individual compounds may provide more comprehensive control. Synthetic drugs present a myriad of health risks ranging from acute physiological and psychological effects to long-term health issues. The variability and unpredictability of these substances exacerbate their danger. Adequate education, prevention, regulatory measures, and access to healthcare resources are essential in addressing the safety challenges posed by synthetic drugs. Maintaining vigilance and fostering collaboration across sectors is crucial to combat the evolving nature of these substances effectively. 7.10 Legal challenges and synthetic drugs. Synthetic drugs, often also referred to as new psychoactive substances, NPS, present a unique set of challenges when it comes to legal regulation. While traditional drugs such as cocaine, heroin, and marijuana have known chemical structures and a long history of use and abuse, synthetic drugs are often designed to circumvent legal restrictions by altering the chemical composition of existing illegal substances. This constant modification of synthetic drugs creates a moving target for legislators and law enforcement. The first challenge in addressing synthetic drugs from a legal standpoint is their rapidly changing nature. Synthetic drug manufacturers often alter the molecular structure of known substances to create new compounds that are not yet classified as illegal. As soon as authorities manage to identify and ban one compound, manufacturers may tweak the formula and produce a variation that is not covered by existing regulations. This means that the legal system must continually play catch-up, crafting and amending legislation to cover the latest iterations of these substances. Another difficulty is the detection and identification of synthetic drugs. Standard drug tests may not detect new synthetic compounds, making it difficult for law enforcement to prove illegal drug use or possession. Moreover, the sheer number of potential new substances makes it a Herculean task for scientific testing procedures to keep pace. Law enforcement agencies and forensic laboratories require significant resources to continually adapt and develop testing methods for the latest synthetic drugs. Identifying the risks and effects of synthetic drugs is also a complex legal problem. Traditional drugs have documented histories of use, allowing for a relatively straightforward assessment of their dangers. In contrast, synthetic drugs may have little to no history of human consumption, making it challenging to predict their potential hazards. This increases the difficulty of justifying legal restrictions, as regulators must rely on theoretical models or limited scientific studies to evaluate the risks associated with these substances. Legislation itself can be a slow and complex process, often lagging behind the rapid emergence of new synthetic drugs. Legal responses require evidence, stakeholder input, and often lengthy debates and reviews before new laws can be passed. This delay in legislation grants a window of opportunity for synthetic drug manufacturers to distribute their products, which can lead to widespread availability and use before any legal action is taken. Efforts to combat the issue often involve analog laws, which ban not only specific drugs, but also their analogs, chemical compounds that are substantially similar in structure and effect to controlled substances. However, these laws can be both over- and under-inclusive. They may inadvertently criminalize benign substances that share structural similarities to illicit drugs, or they may fail to encompass harmful new variants that differ slightly in structure. International collaboration and consistency are paramount when dealing with synthetic drugs. As these substances can easily cross borders, differing legal frameworks between countries can complicate enforcement efforts. A drug that is illegal in one country might be legal or unregulated in another, making international distribution networks hard to dismantle. To improve control, worldwide agencies like the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, often work to foster international agreement on the status of new substances. The rise of the Internet and dark web marketplaces has further complicated the legal response to synthetic drugs. Online sales of new psychoactive substances make tracking and regulating these drugs more difficult. The anonymity provided by the Internet allows manufacturers and consumers to engage in illegal drug transactions with reduced risk of detection. This digital aspect requires law enforcement to develop sophisticated cyber-investigative capabilities. There is also the issue of proportionality in sentencing for synthetic drug offenses. Due to the inherent novelty and unpredictability of these substances, there is no clear consensus on appropriate penalties. Should the legal system treat synthetic drug offenses with the same severity as traditional drug crimes? There is ongoing debate about whether strict penalties serve as an effective deterrent or rather contribute to overburdened prison systems and the marginalization of individuals who use these substances. Amidst all these challenges, there is the need for education and public health initiatives. Authorities must inform the public about the risks associated with synthetic drugs, which in turn can decrease demand and address the problem from a societal standpoint. Effective communication strategies and comprehensive education efforts are crucial elements in the legal approach to controlling synthetic drugs. Finally, the legal system must continuously engage with recent scientific research to stay current on the effects and dangers of new synthetic substances. Collaboration with scientists, medical professionals, and academics can guide informed decision-making when crafting policies related to synthetic drugs. An evidence-based approach is critical to ensure that legal measures are both effective in curbing the distribution and use of synthetic drugs and fair in their imposition on the public. The legal challenges presented by synthetic drugs are multifaceted and ever-evolving. A multidisciplinary approach that includes legislation, international cooperation, scientific research, cyber surveillance, public health education, and a careful review of the principles of penalization is necessary to effectively address the issues posed by these substances. While the task is formidable, a concerted and agile response can help mitigate the impacts of these drugs on society.